The gunshot echoed through the canyon just as Beatrice Owens pressed her body flat against the sandstone wall, her fingers clutching the folded document hidden beneath the layers of her dusty traveling skirt. San Elizario, Texas stretched out below her in the autumn heat of 1878, a collection of adobe buildings and wooden storefronts that promised either salvation or her final resting place, and she had precious few moments to decide which it would be. The men chasing her had been relentless for 3 days now, ever since her uncle had died in that Denver saloon with his last words warning her to run, to protect the claim, to never let them know what she carried. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she heard their horses approaching, the sound of hooves striking stone growing louder with each passing second. She had sewn the gold claim deed into a hidden pocket she had fashioned herself, right between the layers of her petticoat and outer skirt, a place no respectable man would dare to search even if they caught her. The claim was worth more than she could comprehend, her uncle had said, enough to set up 10 families for life, and now 3 dangerous men wanted it badly enough to kill for it. Her uncle had won it in a poker game from a prospector who had struck it rich in the Colorado mountains. But the men who had murdered that prospector were not about to let a piece of paper stand between them and their fortune. She had watched her uncle die, had seen the blood spreading across his vest as he pushed the deed into her hands, and told her to hide it somewhere they would never think to look. The sound of a horse whinnying made her press harder against the rock, her breath coming in short gasps that she tried desperately to quiet. Sweat trickled down her spine despite the approaching evening, and dust coated her throat until she thought she might choke. She was 22 years old, unmarried, alone in a territory that showed little mercy to women without protection, and she had no idea whom she could trust. Her uncle had mentioned a friend in San Elizario, someone named Martinez who owned a cantina, but whether that man would help her or turn her over to the killers was anyone's guess. "She came this way, I saw her tracks," a rough voice called out, close enough that Beatrice could hear the creak of leather as the man shifted in his saddle. "Woman's got to be around here somewhere. She cannot have gotten far on foot." "We should have caught her yesterday," another voice responded, this one higher and meaner. "Boss is not going to be happy if we come back empty-handed again. He wants that deed, and he wants her silenced permanent-like." Beatrice closed her eyes and offered a silent prayer to whatever deity might be listening. She had never been a particularly religious woman, but desperation had a way of changing one's perspective on such matters. Her fingers found the small derringer her uncle had given her for protection, a 2-shot weapon that would be useless against 3 armed men, but might at least give her a chance to avoid the worst of fates. She had no illusions about what men like these would do to a woman before they killed her. The sun was setting, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. She waited, barely breathing, as the horses moved closer. One of them seemed to pause directly above her hiding spot, and she could hear the man muttering curses as he searched the rocks. Her muscles ached from holding herself so still, and a sharp stone dug into her shoulder blade, but she dared not move even a fraction of an inch. Then, miraculously, the sound of the horses began to fade. They were moving away, heading further down the canyon, their voices growing distant as they argued about which direction she might have taken. Beatrice waited until she could no longer hear them at all before she dared to move, her limbs stiff and protesting as she carefully extracted herself from her hiding place. The deed pressed against her thigh like a brand, a constant reminder of both her fortune and her peril. She made her way down the rocky slope as darkness fell, stumbling over stones she could barely see, her hands scraped and bleeding by the time she reached the outskirts of San Elizario. The town was larger than she had expected, with a central plaza surrounded by buildings that spoke of Spanish influence mixed with newer American construction. Lantern lights spilled from windows, and she could hear music coming from somewhere nearby, the bright sound of a guitar and voices raised in song. Beatrice kept to the shadows, her heart still racing, her mind calculating every possible danger. She needed food, water, and a safe place to sleep, but more than that, she needed to figure out what to do with the claim. Her uncle had died protecting it, and she owed it to his memory not to let it fall into the hands of murderers. But what could she do with it? She had no means to travel to Colorado to inspect the mine, no resources to hire men to work it, and no protection against those who would take it from her by force. The cantina was easy to find. A low adobe building with light pouring from its open door and the sound of voices mixing with the smell of roasting meat and corn tortillas. Her stomach clenched with hunger, reminding her that she had eaten nothing but a handful of dried berries since the previous morning. She hesitated at the entrance, acutely aware of how she must look, dust-covered and disheveled. A woman alone entering a place where respectable women rarely went unaccompanied. But she had no choice, and respectability seemed a small price to pay for survival. She stepped inside, and the conversations immediately quieted as heads turned to look at her. She saw Mexican vaqueros and American cowboys, a few townsmen in merchants' clothes, and a large man behind the bar who she guessed must be Martinez. His eyes narrowed as he looked her over, taking in her condition with an expression that revealed nothing. "I need to speak with you," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "My uncle said you were a friend. His name was Thomas Owens." Martinez's expression shifted, something like recognition and concern crossing his weathered features. He gestured to a back room, and Beatrice followed him, aware of the eyes tracking her movements. The room was small, containing little more than a desk and a few chairs, but it offered privacy, and she sank into one of the chairs with a relief that made her bones feel like water. "Thomas is dead," Martinez said, his accent thick but his English clear. "I can see it in your eyes. How did he die?" "3 men shot him in Denver 4 days ago. He told me to run to come here to find you." She paused, trying to decide how much to reveal. "He had something they wanted, something valuable." Martinez studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes shrewd. "And you have this valuable thing now, yes? This is why you look like you have been running through the desert with the devil himself on your heels." She nodded slowly. "I need help. I do not know what to do, and those men are still hunting me. They followed me here." "This valuable thing," Martinez said carefully. "It would not happen to be a certain gold claim that Thomas won 3 weeks ago, would it? He sent me a letter, told me he had struck it lucky, that he was going to be a rich man." Beatrice's hand moved instinctively to her skirt, and Martinez caught the gesture. His eyes widened slightly, and then, to her surprise, he laughed, a deep sound that seemed to come from his belly. "Dios mío, you carry it on you. That is either very brave or very foolish, muchacha. Those men, if they catch you, they will search everything." "Not everything," she said quietly, and understanding dawned in his eyes. "Ah," he said, and had the grace to look away, a flush creeping up his neck. "That is clever, I will give you that. But it only protects you if they think to take you alive, and men like that, they are not always thinking clearly when it comes to killing." "I know," she whispered. "That is why I need help. Can you help me?" Martinez was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming on the desk. "Finally," he said, "I can give you food and a place to sleep tonight in the back where no one will see you. But you need more than that. You need protection. Someone who can get you out of San Elizario and somewhere safe." These men, they will search the town. They will ask questions, and someone will talk eventually. There is always someone who will talk for the right price. Then what do I do? The desperation in her voice was evident even to her own ears. There is a man, Martinez said slowly. A cowboy who does work for me sometimes, drives cattle, handles trouble when it comes up. His name is Gabriel Brennan, and he is honest, which is more than I can say for most men in these parts. He is also very good with a gun, and he does not scare easily. If you can convince him to help you, you might have a chance. Where is he? He should be here tomorrow morning. He was supposed to arrive today, but he sent word that he had some trouble with a mountain lion near his camp and had to deal with it. He will come looking for the work I promised him. Martinez stood, moving to the door. Stay here. I will bring you food and water, and you can sleep on the floor tonight. It is not comfortable, but it is safe. In the morning, we will talk to Gabriel and see if he is willing to help you. Beatrice wanted to protest, to demand more immediate action, but exhaustion was creeping over her like a heavy blanket. She nodded, and Martinez left, returning a few minutes later with a plate piled high with beef, beans, and tortillas, along with a clay cup of water that she drank so fast she nearly choked on it. He brought her a blanket as well, thin but clean, and a small pillow that smelled of lavender. Lock the door behind me, he instructed. Do not open it for anyone but me, and I will knock 3 times, then twice, so you know it is me. Understand, she understood, and once he was gone, she secured the door and collapsed onto the floor, the blanket pulled around her shoulders. Despite her exhaustion, sleep was long in coming. Every sound from the cantina made her tense, every raised voice or burst of laughter sending her heart racing. She kept the derringer close to her hand, her fingers wrapped around its small grip, and she thought about her uncle, about the way his eyes had looked as the life left them, about his last words urging her to survive. She must have slept eventually, because she woke to sunlight streaming through a high window and the sound of Martinez's distinctive knock. She scrambled to her feet, her body protesting every movement, and opened the door to find him carrying a basin of water and a towel. Gabriel is here, he said without preamble. Clean yourself up as best you can and then come out to meet him. I have not told him anything yet. I thought you should be the one to explain. Beatrice washed quickly, the water turning brown with the dust she scrubbed from her face and hands. She did what she could with her hair, braiding it back from her face, and brushed the worst of the dirt from her dress. She still looked like she had been through an ordeal, but at least she no longer looked like she had been dragged behind a horse. The deed was still secure in its hiding place, a weight she had grown accustomed to carrying. When she stepped out into the main room of the cantina, it was empty except for Martinez and a tall man standing near the bar. Gabriel Brennan was perhaps 25 or 26, with sun-darkened skin, and hair the color of aged whiskey that curled slightly at his collar. He had the lean, muscular build of a man who spent his days in hard physical labor, and his eyes were an unexpected shade of green that seemed to take in everything at once. He wore dusty trail clothes, a gun belt slung low on his hips, and scuffed boots that had seen better days. There was something in the way he held himself that spoke of confidence without arrogance, and when he turned to look at her, his expression was curious, but not unkind. "Miss Owens," he said, his voice a deep drawl that marked him as someone who had spent time in Texas, though she thought she detected something else beneath it, perhaps Kansas or Missouri. "Martinez tells me you might be in need of some assistance." "That is an understatement," she replied, moving closer but maintaining a respectful distance. "I need someone who can help me get out of San Elizario and to somewhere safe, and who can handle himself if trouble comes looking. Martinez says you are that man." Gabriel's eyes flicked to Martinez, who nodded confirmation, and then back to her. Safe from what, exactly? I am not in the habit of taking on jobs when I do not know what I am getting into. She appreciated his directness, and she decided to match it with her own. 3 men are hunting me because I have something they want, something my uncle died protecting. They will kill me to get it, and they will not hesitate to kill anyone who stands in their way. If you help me, you will be putting yourself in danger. What is this thing they want so badly? Gabriel asked. Beatrice hesitated, glancing at Martinez, who gave her an encouraging nod. A gold claim. A very valuable one in Colorado. My uncle won it gambling, but it originally belonged to a prospector that these men killed. They think it belongs to them, and they are not the type to let legal documents stand in their way. Gabriel was quiet for a moment, his gaze steady on her face. Where is this claim now? Hidden, she said simply. Somewhere they would not think to look. Understanding flickered in his eyes, and she saw the corner of his mouth twitch as if he were suppressing a smile. I see. And what exactly do you want me to do? Get you to Colorado so you can register the claim properly. I suppose that would be the logical course of action, she admitted. Though honestly, I have not had much time to think beyond staying alive. These men have been chasing me for days, and I expect they are searching the town right now. It is only a matter of time before they find me here. Gabriel turned to Martinez. These men, you know who they are. I can guess, Martinez replied grimly. There are 3 men who rode through here 2 days ago, asking questions about a woman traveling alone. They had the look of killers about them. I told them I had seen no one, but they are staying at the boarding house on the edge of town. They have been watching the roads. Then we have a problem, Gabriel said. If they are watching the roads, leaving town is going to be difficult, especially with a woman in tow. They will spot us before we get a mile out of San Elizario. He thought for a moment, his brow furrowed. What do these men look like? Martinez described them in detail, and Beatrice filled in additional information based on her own encounters. Gabriel listened intently, and she could almost see his mind working through possibilities and scenarios. All right, he said finally. I have an idea, but it is going to require some acting on your part, Miss Owens, and you are going to have to trust me completely. Can you do that? That depends on what you are asking me to do, she said carefully. I am asking you to pretend to be my wife for a few days while we travel north out of San Elizario. A cowboy and his wife heading to visit family would attract less attention than a man escorting a single woman. We can take the back trails, avoid the main roads where these men are watching. It will be slower, but it will be safer. He paused, then added, and I give you my word as a gentleman that I will treat you with respect. This would be strictly for appearance. Beatrice considered his proposal. It was risky, putting herself in the hands of a man she did not know, but what choice did she have? Staying in San Elizario meant being found eventually, and she could see no other way to escape the noose that was tightening around her. What is your price for helping me? She asked. I have no money to pay you now, but once the claim is registered, I could offer you a percentage. Gabriel shook his head. Keep your gold, Miss Owens. I do not want a percentage of your claim. But I do need the work Martinez promised me, and if helping you is part of that work, then I will do it for the wages we already agreed upon. Fair enough. Something in his tone made her look at him more carefully. There was sincerity in his eyes, an honesty that she had not expected to find. Most men would have jumped at the chance for a share in a gold mine, but he seemed genuinely uninterested in her fortune. It was so unusual that she found herself trusting him almost against her better judgment. Fair enough, she agreed. When do we leave? Within the hour, if possible. The longer we wait, the more chance there is of those men finding you here. "Martinez, can you provide us with supplies? Enough food and water for about 5 days should do it. We will head north toward Fort Bliss and then cut east from there. It is a longer route, but it will keep us away from the places they will be watching." Martinez agreed, and the next hour passed in a flurry of preparation. Beatrice was given a different dress, one that belonged to Martinez's sister and was less travel-worn than her own. It was a simple cotton affair in dark blue, with a full skirt that would serve well for riding. Martinez also provided her with a split riding skirt to wear underneath, a practical concession to the journey ahead. Gabriel brought his horse around, a sturdy buckskin gelding named Ranger, and Martinez loaned them a second horse, a gray mare with gentle eyes that he said was steady and reliable. As they prepared to leave, Gabriel took her aside, his expression serious. "Once we are on the trail, you need to follow my lead without question. If I tell you to ride hard, you ride hard. If I tell you to hide, you hide. If I tell you to shoot, you shoot. Your life may depend on how quickly you can react, and I cannot protect you if you are going to argue with every decision I make." "Understood. Understood," she said, meeting his eyes. "But I am not helpless, Mr. Brennan. I can ride, I can shoot, and I can think for myself. Do not treat me like fragile china that will shatter at the first sign of trouble." A genuine smile crossed his face then, the first she had seen from him, and it transformed his features from merely handsome to something that made her breath catch slightly. "I would not dare, Miss Owens. You have survived 3 days being hunted by killers. That tells me you are tougher than most men I know." They rode out of San Elizario just as the sun reached its zenith, the heat pressing down on them like a physical weight. Gabriel had suggested they pose as a married couple named John and Mary Porter, and he had purchased a simple gold band from a local merchant to lend authenticity to their story. The ring was too large for her finger, but she wore it anyway, twisting it nervously as they left the town behind. The land stretched out around them, vast and unforgiving, dotted with mesquite and creosote bushes that seemed to shimmer in the heat. Gabriel led them north, away from the main road, following paths that were barely visible to Beatrice's untrained eye. He rode with an easy confidence that spoke of years spent in the saddle, and he kept a constant watch on their surroundings, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of pursuit. They rode in silence for the first hour, both of them tense and listening for sounds of horses following. But the desert remained quiet except for the occasional call of a bird and the steady clop of their horses' hooves on the hard, packed earth. As the afternoon wore on and no pursuit materialized, Beatrice felt some of the tension ease from her shoulders, though she remained vigilant. "Tell me about this uncle of yours," Gabriel said eventually, breaking the silence. "What kind of man was he?" Beatrice was surprised by the question, but she supposed it made sense for him to want to know more about the situation he had involved himself in. "He was my mother's brother, the only family I had left after my parents died of fever 5 years ago. He was a gambler and a drifter, never staying in one place too long, but he always looked after me as best he could. He would send money when he had it, and he visited when he was able. He was not perfect, but he was kind, and he loved me in his way. And these men who killed him, you saw it happen," she nodded, the memory still fresh and painful. "I was bringing him dinner at the saloon where he was playing cards. I heard the shots before I even reached the door. By the time I got inside, he was already dying. He gave me the deed and told me to run, told me to never let them catch me. Then he died right there in my arms in front of all those people, and no one did anything to stop the men who killed him." Gabriel's jaw tightened. Did the law get involved? There was no law to speak of in that particular establishment. The sheriff was paid to look the other way, And even if he had not been, everyone was too afraid to testify against those men. They work for someone powerful, someone with enough money and influence to make problems disappear. She paused, then added, "My uncle told me once that the original prospector who found the gold had been killed because he refused to sell his claim to this man. I do not even know his name, but I know he will stop at nothing to get what he thinks belongs to him." "And yet you are not willing to just give him the claim and save yourself," Gabriel observed. "Would you?" she countered. "Would you let murderers profit from their crimes just to save your own skin? My uncle died protecting this claim, protecting me. I owe it to him to see that it goes to someone who deserves it, not to the men who killed him." Gabriel was quiet for a moment, then said, "You are either very brave or very stubborn, Miss Owens. Maybe both. Right now, I am just trying to survive long enough to figure out what brave and stubborn will get me," she replied, and was rewarded with another of his smiles. They made camp that evening in a small canyon that provided shelter from the wind and concealment from anyone who might be searching for them. Gabriel built a small fire, keeping it low so the smoke would not be visible from a distance, and they shared a simple meal of jerky, hardtack, and water from their canteens. The sun set in a spectacular display of color, and as darkness fell, the desert came alive with sounds that Beatrice found both beautiful and slightly unnerving. "Tell me about yourself," she said as they sat by the fire, the flames casting dancing shadows across Gabriel's face. "Martinez said you are honest and good with a gun, but that does not tell me much about who you are." Gabriel poked at the fire with a stick, seeming to consider how much to reveal. "Not much to tell. That would be interesting. I grew up in Missouri on a farm that my father lost when I was 16. After that, I drifted west, working cattle drives and doing odd jobs wherever I could find them. I have been in Texas for the past 5 years, mostly around El Paso and San Elizario. I am good at what I do, which is handling horses and cattle and the occasional trouble that comes with them." "Are you married? Do you have family?" "No to the first, not much to the second. My parents are both gone and I had a sister, but she died of consumption 3 years back. I have an aunt somewhere in Kansas, but we do not keep in touch." He glanced at her, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. "What about you? Just your uncle, or is there more?" "Just my uncle, and now not even that. My parents died when I was 17, and I have been making my own way since then. I worked as a seamstress in Denver, which is how I could afford the room where I was staying when my uncle found me. It was not much of a life, but it was honest work, and I was proud of being able to support myself." "Seamstress," Gabriel repeated thoughtfully. "That explains the hidden pocket. Clever work, that." Beatrice felt her cheeks warm, though whether from embarrassment or something else, she was not entirely sure. "I learned to sew from my mother. She always said a woman should have skills she can rely on, something that does not depend on the charity or goodwill of men." "Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was," Beatrice agreed softly. "I wish she were here now. She would know what to do about all of this." They fell silent after that, each lost in their own thoughts. Gabriel insisted that she sleep first while he kept watch, and though she protested that she could take her turn, he was adamant. She wrapped herself in the blanket Martinez had provided and lay down near the fire, her body exhausted but her mind still racing with everything that had happened. The last thing she was aware of before sleep claimed her was the sight of Gabriel sitting with his rifle across his knees, his gaze fixed on the darkness beyond their small circle of light. She woke once in the night to find that they had switched positions. She was keeping watch now, though she had no memory of Gabriel waking her, and he was asleep on the other side of the fire, his hat pulled low over his face. She wondered how he had managed to move her without waking her, and decided he must be even more skilled than she had realized. The second day of travel passed much like the first, long hours in the saddle punctuated by brief stops to rest the horses and eat. Gabriel continued to lead them along paths that seemed to exist only in his mind, navigating by the sun and the shape of the land in ways that Beatrice found both impressive and slightly mysterious. They saw no one, which Gabriel said was a good sign. The fewer people who could report seeing them, the better their chances of staying ahead of their pursuers. That evening, as they made camp in the shelter of a rocky outcropping, Beatrice worked up the courage to ask the question that had been nagging at her since they left San Elizario. "Why are you doing this? And please do not tell me it is just for the wages Martinez promised you. I know those wages are not enough to justify the risk you are taking." Gabriel was quiet for a long moment, his hands busy with preparing the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful, almost hesitant. "I suppose it is because I believe people should help each other when they can, especially when someone is in trouble through no fault of their own. You did not ask to be put in this situation. You did not kill that prospector or steal that claim. You are just trying to survive and do right by your uncle's memory. That seems like something worth helping with." "But that is not the whole reason, is it?" she pressed gently. He looked up at her then, and she saw something in his eyes that she could not quite name. Pain, perhaps, or regret, or maybe just a deep weariness with the world. "No," he admitted. "It is not the whole reason. The truth is, my sister died because no one would help her when she needed it. She got sick, and she had no money for a doctor, and I was away on a cattle drive and did not even know until it was too late. When I finally got back to the town where she had been staying, she had been dead for 2 weeks, buried in a pauper's grave because she had no one to pay for anything better. I swore then that if I ever had the chance to help someone who had no one else, I would do it, regardless of the cost to myself." Beatrice felt tears prick at her eyes, moved by his honesty and the pain that clearly still haunted him. "I am sorry about your sister. That must have been terrible for you." "It was," he said simply. "It still is. But helping you, maybe it is a way of making up for not being there when she needed me. Maybe it is a way of being the person I wish someone had been for her." She reached out without thinking and placed her hand on his arm, a gesture of comfort and understanding. He looked down at her hand, then back at her face, and something shifted in the air between them, something unspoken but powerful. She pulled her hand back quickly, suddenly aware of the intimacy of the gesture and the fact that they were alone in the desert with no chaperone or protection for her reputation. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for telling me that and for helping me. I will not forget it." "You are welcome," he replied, his voice rough. "Now we should eat and get some rest. We still have a long way to go." The next 3 days passed in a rhythm that became almost comfortable despite the underlying tension of their situation. They rode during the cooler parts of the day, rested during the worst of the heat, and made camp in the evening. Gabriel proved to be an easy traveling companion, quiet when she wanted silence and willing to talk when she needed distraction. He told her stories about his time on cattle drives, about stampedes and river crossings, and the characters he had met along the way. She, in turn, told him about her life in Denver, about the women she had sewn for, and the challenges of making her way as a single woman in a city that often seemed hostile to independence. They fell into an easy pattern of sharing camp duties, with Beatrice cooking and Gabriel handling the horses and setting up their sleeping arrangements. He was always respectful, always careful to maintain a proper distance, but she found herself increasingly aware of his presence, of the way his eyes would linger on her face when he thought she was not looking, of the warmth in his voice when he said her name. On the 5th day, they reached Fort Bliss, and Gabriel decided it was safe enough for them to stop at the general store for fresh supplies. They had run low on several essentials, and he wanted to replace their water before they headed east toward the rail line that would eventually take them to Colorado. Beatrice waited outside with the horses while Gabriel went into the store, nervous about being seen but trusting his judgment. She kept her head down, trying to look like nothing more than a tired traveler's wife waiting for her husband. The minutes ticked by slowly, and she was beginning to worry when Gabriel emerged carrying a burlap sack of goods. "We have a problem," he said quietly as he secured the supplies to his saddle. "There are 3 men in town asking about a woman matching your description. The storekeeper said they arrived this morning and have been questioning everyone they meet." Beatrice felt her blood run cold. "How did they get ahead of us? We took the back trails, we were careful. They must have split up, sent one group to watch the roads and another to check the towns along the northern route. It was smart, I will give them that." Gabriel swung into his saddle, his expression grim. "We need to leave now, and we need to ride hard. There is a line shack about 10 miles east of here, used by the Fort Bliss cavalry when they are on patrol. If we can reach it before dark, we can hole up there and figure out our next move." They rode out of Fort Bliss at a pace just short of a gallop, fast enough to cover ground quickly, but not so fast as to attract undue attention. Beatrice could feel her heart pounding, the familiar fear of pursuit washing over her again after days of relative peace. The deed pressed against her leg, a constant reminder of why these men were so determined to catch her. They were perhaps 3 miles from town when she heard the sound she had been dreading, the thunder of hooves behind them, growing closer with each passing second. She glanced back and saw 3 riders coming up fast, and even at this distance she could see the glint of weapons in their hands. "Gabriel!" she shouted, and he looked back, his face hardening as he took in the situation. "Ride!" he commanded, and they kicked their horses into a full gallop. The chase was on, and for the next several minutes, Beatrice focused on nothing but staying in the saddle as her mare raced across the desert floor. Gabriel rode slightly ahead of her, leading them toward a series of low hills that offered the promise of cover. The men behind them were gaining, their horses fresher or faster, and Beatrice knew it was only a matter of time before they were overtaken. Gabriel led them into a narrow ravine between 2 hills, and then suddenly pulled his horse to a stop, dismounting quickly. "Get down," he ordered, and Beatrice obeyed without question, her legs shaking as she hit the ground. Gabriel pulled both horses deeper into the ravine, where a tumble of boulders provided some concealment, and then he positioned himself behind a large rock with his rifle in his hands. "Stay behind me," he said, his voice calm despite the situation. "And get your derringer ready. If they get past me, you shoot without hesitation. Aim for the center of their body, it is the largest target." Beatrice pulled the small weapon from her pocket, her hands trembling as she checked to make sure it was loaded. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, and then the 3 men appeared at the entrance to the ravine. They slowed as they saw the narrow passage, their horses dancing nervously, and one of them called out, "We know you are in there. Send the woman out and we will let you ride away. This is not your fight, Cowboy." "It became my fight when I agreed to protect her," Gabriel called back. "You boys should turn around and ride back the way you came. No one needs to get hurt here." The men laughed, a sound that made Beatrice's skin crawl. "You are outnumbered 3-1, friend. You really want to die for a woman you do not even know, for a piece of paper that is not yours." "I have been outnumbered before," Gabriel replied evenly. "It did not work out well for the other fellows. This is your last chance to ride away." There was a moment of tense silence, and then one of the men made the mistake of going for his gun. Gabriel's rifle cracked once, and the man jerked backward in his saddle, his weapon falling from his hand. The other two men opened fire, bullets ricocheting off the rocks around them, and Gabriel returned fire with methodical precision. Beatrice pressed herself against the boulder, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. The gunfight lasted less than a minute, though it felt like hours. When the smoke cleared, two of the men were on the ground and the third was racing away back toward Fort Bliss, blood streaming from his shoulder. Gabriel kept his rifle trained on the fleeing rider until he disappeared from sight, and then he lowered the weapon with a long exhale. "Are you all right?" he asked, turning to Beatrice, and she nodded, though she was shaking so badly she could barely stand. He reached out and steadied her with a hand on her arm, his touch warm and solid. "It is over now. They will not be coming after us again, at least not those three." "You killed them," she whispered, looking at the bodies sprawled in the dust. "I did," he said quietly. "And I wish I had not had to, but they did not give me a choice. It was their lives or ours, Beatrice, and I chose ours." She noticed that he had used her first name, a small intimacy that would have been improper under different circumstances, but felt right in this moment. She looked up at him, at the serious expression on his face, and she realized that this man had just risked his life for her, had killed to protect her, without expecting anything in return. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely audible. "You saved my life." "That is what I am here for," he replied. But his eyes told her that it was more than that, that somewhere in the past 5 days, this had stopped being just a job and had become something personal. They left the bodies where they lay, taking only the men's weapons and ammunition, before continuing east toward the line shack Gabriel had mentioned. They rode in silence, both of them processing what had just happened, and Beatrice found herself studying Gabriel's profile as he guided them through the desert. He was a good man, she realized, one of the few truly good men she had ever known. He was brave and skilled and honest, and he had asked for nothing from her except her trust. The line shack was a simple structure, barely more than 4 walls and a roof, but it offered shelter from the elements and a place to rest. Gabriel checked inside first to make sure it was safe, and then he helped her down from her horse, his hands lingering on her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. She found she did not mind. They tended the horses and then went inside, where Gabriel used the last of the daylight to check their supplies and plan their next move. "We will rest here tonight and tomorrow," he said. "I want to make sure that Ryder did not circle back with reinforcements before we move on. After that, we will head to the rail station at Usleta. You can catch a train from there to Colorado Springs, and from there it is not far to Denver and the claims office." "What about you?" she asked. "Will you come with me?" He looked surprised by the question. "That was not part of our agreement. I was supposed to get you safely away from San Elizario and to a place where you could continue on your own. Usleta is that place." "I know what our agreement was," she said carefully, "but I am asking if you will come with me anyway. Not because I am paying you or because Martinez asked you to, but because I want you to. Because I have come to realize that I trust you more than anyone I have ever known, and because I do not want to say goodbye to you yet." The admission hung in the air between them, more revealing than she had intended, and she saw Gabriel's expression shift, saw the walls he had been carefully maintaining begin to crumble. He took a step toward her, then stopped himself, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. "Beatrice," he said, her name a rough whisper. "You do not know what you are saying. We have been through a traumatic experience together, and it is natural to feel a connection because of that, but it is not real. Once you are safe and you have time to think clearly, you will realize that." "Do not tell me what I feel," she said, moving closer to him. I know my own mind, Gabriel Brennan, and I know that what I feel for you is not gratitude or relief or confusion. I have been watching you these past days, learning who you are, and I like what I see. I like your honor and your courage and your kindness. I like the way you treat me as an equal instead of something fragile that needs to be protected from the world. I like you, and I think you might like me too, if you would let yourself admit it. He stared at her, and she could see the conflict in his eyes, the war between what he wanted and what he thought was right. I do like you, he said finally. More than I should, more than is wise. But you have a gold claim worth a fortune, and I am a cowboy who owns nothing but a horse and a saddle. What kind of future could I offer you? I do not care about the gold, she said, and she realized as she said it that it was true. Or rather, I care about it only because my uncle died for it and I want to honor his sacrifice. But the money itself, the wealth it represents, that means nothing to me. I do not want to be rich. I just want to be happy, to build a life with someone who respects me and cares for me, someone I can respect and care for in return. If you tell me you do not feel anything for me, I will accept that, and we will part ways at Usleta as planned. But if you do feel something, even a little, then do not let pride or some misguided sense of propriety keep you from saying so. Gabriel closed the distance between them in 2 quick strides, and then his hands were on her face, cupping her cheeks with a gentleness that belied the intensity in his eyes. I feel everything, he said roughly. From the moment I saw you walk into Martinez's cantina, looking like you had been through hell but refusing to let it break you, I have been lost. I told myself it was just admiration, just respect for your courage, but I have been lying to myself. The truth is I started falling for you somewhere between San Elizario and here, and I do not know how to stop. Then do not stop, she whispered, and then his lips were on hers and nothing else mattered. The kiss was everything she had not known she needed, fierce and tender at the same time, full of all the words they had not said, and all the feelings they had been holding back. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and she melted into him, her hands clutching at his shirt as if she could anchor herself to this moment and make it last forever. When they finally broke apart, both of them breathing hard, she saw her own wonder reflected in his eyes. This is crazy, he said, but he was smiling. We have known each other less than a week. I know, she agreed, and I do not care. Sometimes you just know, Gabriel. Sometimes you meet someone and everything just fits like pieces of a puzzle you did not even know was incomplete. That is how I feel about you. He kissed her again, softer this time, and then rested his forehead against hers. I will come with you to Colorado, he said. Not because you need protection or because I want a share of your gold, but because I cannot imagine letting you walk out of my life. Whatever happens, wherever this leads, I want to see it through with you. That is all I am asking, she said, and she felt a lightness in her chest that had nothing to do with relief and everything to do with joy. They spent the evening making plans, talking about the future in a way that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. Gabriel admitted that he had always dreamed of having his own ranch, a place where he could raise horses and cattle and build something that would last. Beatrice confessed that she had always wanted a home, a real home with roots and family, and the kind of stability she had never known. They talked about Colorado and what they might find there, about the possibility of claiming the gold mine and selling it to someone who could work it properly, using the money to buy land and start fresh. I do not want to work the mine, Beatrice said. Mining is dangerous and hard, and it attracts the kind of men who would rather steal than work. But if we sell the claim to a legitimate mining company, we could use that money to build the kind of life we want. Together. Together, Gabriel repeated, testing the word. I like the sound of that. They slept that night on opposite sides of the small shack, maintaining propriety despite the feelings they had confessed. Gabriel was adamant that he would not compromise her reputation any more than their traveling together already had, and she appreciated his respect even as she longed to be closer to him. The next morning, they continued their journey with a new sense of purpose. They were no longer just fleeing from danger. They were traveling toward a future they would build together. The train ride from Usleta to Colorado Springs was Beatrice's first time on a railway, and she spent much of it pressed against the window, watching the landscape change from desert to grassland to the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. Gabriel sat beside her, his hand occasionally brushing hers, a small contact that sent warmth through her entire body. They were more careful with their affection in public, aware of the scrutiny that an unmarried couple traveling together would attract, but in private moments, in the spaces between towns and trains, they were learning each other's hearts. They arrived in Colorado Springs in late October of 1878, and from there, they traveled to Denver by stagecoach. The city was larger than Beatrice remembered, more bustling and full of opportunity. Gabriel helped her navigate the bureaucracy of the claims office, standing beside her as she presented the deed and answered questions about how she had come to possess it. The clerk was skeptical at first, particularly of a woman filing a claim, but the documentation was in order, and Gabriel's presence seemed to lend her credibility. The claim was officially registered in her name 2 weeks later, and with the help of a lawyer Gabriel's friend recommended, they arranged to sell it to a mining company that had been looking to expand its operations in that particular region. The sale took another month to finalize, involving negotiations and surveys and more paperwork than Beatrice had thought possible, but when it was done, she found herself in possession of a bank draft for an amount that made her head spin. What now? Gabriel asked as they stood outside the bank, the draft safely deposited, a reality they were both still trying to process. Now we find our future, she said, linking her arm through his. I heard there is good land for sale near Durango in the southwestern part of the state. Rolling hills, good water, perfect for cattle and horses. What do you think? I think that sounds like exactly what we need, he said, looking down at her with an expression that made her heart race. But first, there is something else we need to do. What is that? He pulled a small box from his pocket, the same pocket where he usually kept his tobacco, and opened it to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a small ruby. Beatrice Owens, I know we have not known each other long, and I know this is all happening fast, but I also know that I love you. I have loved you since you stood up to those men in the ravine, since you told me you trusted me, since you kissed me like I was worth something. I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy, building a home with you, being the man you deserve. Will you marry me? Beatrice felt tears streaming down her cheeks, but she was smiling so broadly her face hurt. Yes, she said, her voice breaking with emotion. Yes, Gabriel, I will marry you. I love you too, more than I can even put into words. He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Then he kissed her right there on the street in front of the bank, in front of God and everyone, and she did not care who saw or what they thought. She was happy, truly happy, for the first time in years. They were married 3 days later in a small church in Denver, with Gabriel's friend and the friend's wife standing as witnesses. Beatrice wore a simple white dress that she had purchased with her own money, and Gabriel wore a new suit that made him look almost uncomfortable but devastatingly handsome. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Beatrice felt like her heart might burst with joy. Their wedding night was spent in a small but clean hotel room, and as Gabriel carried her over the threshold, Beatrice laughed with pure delight. They made love for the first time as husband and wife, slowly and tenderly, learning each other's bodies with the same care they had taken in learning each other's hearts. Afterward, lying in Gabriel's arms, Beatrice felt a contentment she had never known was possible. "I never thought I would have this," she whispered into the darkness. "A husband who loves me, a future to look forward to, a real home." "You have all of that now," Gabriel murmured, his lips against her hair. "And I promise you, I will spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me." "I could never regret you," she said, tilting her face up to kiss him. "You are the best thing that has ever happened to me." They traveled to Durango in early December, arriving just as the first snow was beginning to dust the mountain peaks. The land they had purchased sight unseen turned out to be even better than they had hoped. A beautiful valley with a clear stream running through it and grass that would be lush come spring. There was a small cabin on the property, rough but solid, and Gabriel immediately began making plans for improvements and additions. That first winter was hard, harder than either of them had anticipated. They learned how to work the land together, how to care for the small herd of cattle they purchased with part of their savings, how to survive when the snow piled high and the temperature dropped below freezing. But they also learned how to laugh together, how to find joy in the small moments, how to build a life from nothing but determination and love. Beatrice proved to be stronger than even she had realized, working alongside Gabriel to clear land and mend fences and care for animals. Gabriel taught her to ride better, to rope, to handle a gun with confidence. She taught him about bookkeeping and planning, about turning their ranch from a dream into a functioning business. They were partners in every sense of the word, and their love deepened with each shared challenge and triumph. By spring, they had expanded the cabin into a proper house, with 2 bedrooms and a real kitchen and windows that let in the light. Gabriel built Beatrice a workshop where she could continue her sewing, and she made curtains and quilts that transformed their house into a home. They acquired more cattle, and Gabriel began to build a reputation as a skilled horseman who could break and train even the most difficult animals. In the summer of 1879, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with both joy and fear, memories of her mother's difficult pregnancies and the dangers that childbirth presented. But Gabriel was beside her every step of the way, attending to her needs, easing her worries, and preparing for the arrival of their child with an enthusiasm that made her love him even more. Their daughter was born in March of 1880, during a late winter storm that trapped them in the house for 3 days. Gabriel delivered the baby himself, with the help of a midwife who had arrived just before the snow started falling. The birth was difficult, but both mother and child survived, and when Gabriel placed their daughter in Beatrice's arms for the first time, she wept with a happiness so profound it was almost painful. They named her Grace, because that was what she represented, the grace of a second chance, of a life built from ashes, of love found in the most unlikely circumstances. Grace was a healthy, happy baby with Gabriel's green eyes and Beatrice's dark hair, and she quickly became the center of their world. Over the next few years, their ranch prospered. Gabriel's reputation grew, and he was able to command good prices for the horses he trained. Beatrice's sewing skills brought in additional income, as the women of Durango discovered her talent for creating beautiful, practical garments. They were not wealthy, not in the way the gold claim might have made them if they had kept it and worked it themselves, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. Grace was joined by a son in 1882, a boy they named Thomas after Beatrice's uncle. Thomas was a quieter child than his sister, thoughtful and gentle, with his mother's serious eyes and his father's steady temperament. 2 years later, another daughter arrived, whom they named Clara after Gabriel's sister. The house that had once seemed so spacious was now filled with the noise and chaos of 3 young children, but Beatrice would not have changed it for anything. Gabriel proved to be a wonderful father, patient and playful, teaching his children to ride and rope and respect the land. Beatrice taught them to read and write, to sew and cook, to think for themselves and stand up for what was right. Together, they instilled in their children the values that had brought them together: honesty, courage, kindness, and the belief that family was worth fighting for. As the years passed, the story of how Beatrice and Gabriel had met became a favorite tale for their children, told and retold on winter evenings by the fire. The children loved hearing about their mother's bravery in hiding the gold claim, about their father's skill in protecting her from the bad men, about the adventure that had brought their parents together. Beatrice and Gabriel always emphasized the importance of doing what was right even when it was difficult, of helping others even when it came at personal cost, of choosing love over wealth or security. The gold claim that had once seemed so important faded into memory, just one chapter in a much larger story. What mattered was not the wealth it had represented, but the journey it had set in motion, the love it had inadvertently brought into their lives. Beatrice never regretted selling it, never wondered what might have been if she had kept it. She had everything she needed right here in this valley, in this house, with this man and these children. Gabriel sometimes joked that he had told her to keep her gold because he only wanted her, but the truth was they had built something far more valuable together than any mine could have produced. They had built a family, a home, a life of purpose and meaning. They had built happiness, and that was the richest treasure of all. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Gabriel surprised Beatrice with a trip back to San Elizario. Martinez was still running his cantina, older and grayer but still the same warm, welcoming man who had helped a desperate woman and trusted a cowboy to do the right thing. They spent an evening with him, sharing stories and laughter, and Beatrice was able to properly thank him for the role he had played in saving her life and bringing her to Gabriel. "I knew from the moment I saw you two together that it would work out," Martinez said, refilling their glasses with his best whiskey. "There was something in the way he looked at you, even then, like you were the most precious thing he had ever seen. And you looked at him like he was the answer to a question you had been asking your whole life. I am just glad I could help bring you together." They returned to Durango with renewed appreciation for the path that had led them to this life. Their children were growing, Grace already 17, and beginning to attract suitors of her own, Thomas 15, and showing promise as a horseman to rival his father, Clara 13, and as fierce and independent as her mother. The ranch was thriving, and Gabriel had recently purchased additional land to expand their operation. As Beatrice stood on the porch of their home one evening, watching the sun set over the mountains and listening to the sounds of her family inside, she thought about how much her life had changed since that desperate flight from Denver. She had been running from death and fear, clutching a piece of paper that represented a fortune she had never asked for. She had hidden that paper under her skirt, in a secret pocket sewn with her own hands, believing it was the most valuable thing she possessed. But she had been wrong. The most valuable thing she possessed had not been the gold claim. It had been her courage, her strength, her ability to trust when trust seemed impossible. And those qualities had led her to Gabriel, who had looked past the gold to see the woman beneath, who had risked everything to protect her, who had offered her not wealth but something far more precious: himself. Gabriel came out to join her on the porch, slipping his arm around her waist and pulling her close. She leaned into him, still marveling after all these years at how perfectly they fit together, how right it felt to be in his arms. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his voice warm and familiar. "Just about how lucky I am," she said. "How lucky we are. I was running for my life and I found my home. I was trying to protect a fortune and I found something worth more than all the gold in Colorado." "And what is that?" he asked, though she knew he already knew the answer. "You," she said simply. "Us. This life we have built together. I would not trade a single day of it, not even the hard ones, not even the scary ones, because they all led me here to you, to this." Gabriel turned her to face him, his hands cupping her face the same way they had that first night in the lined shack when he had confessed his feelings. His eyes were as green and intense as ever, and the love she saw in them was a mirror of her own. "I told you once to keep your gold because I only wanted you," he said softly. "And I have never regretted that choice. You are worth more than any fortune, Beatrice Brennan. You are my fortune, you and our children and this life we share. Everything else is just details." She kissed him then, a kiss that held 20 years of love and trust and partnership, a kiss that promised 20 more years and beyond. When they finally broke apart, both of them smiling, she heard laughter from inside the house, the sound of their children arguing good-naturedly about something trivial and unimportant. "We should go in," Gabriel said, "before they start wondering what we are doing out here." "Let them wonder," Beatrice replied, but she let him lead her inside anyway, into the warmth and light and love that filled their home. The years continued to pass, bringing with them the joys and sorrows that were part of any life. Grace married a good man, a rancher from a neighboring property, and gave Beatrice and Gabriel their first grandchildren. Thomas took over more of the ranch operations, proving himself as capable as his father. Clara went to Denver to study teaching and returned with a quiet determination to educate the children of Durango, regardless of their background or circumstances. Gabriel and Beatrice grew older together, their hair turning silver, their faces lined with the marks of a life well lived. But their love never diminished, never faded. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year, deepened by shared experiences and mutual respect, and the simple joy of waking up each morning beside the person who knew them better than anyone else in the world. On a warm summer evening in 1905, Beatrice and Gabriel sat together on their porch, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. The ranch had been successful beyond their wildest dreams, providing not just for their family but for the several families of ranch hands they employed. The house had been expanded multiple times over the years, but it still retained the character and warmth that Beatrice had imbued it with from the beginning. "You ever think about what your life would have been like if you had never met me?" Gabriel asked, his hand clasped in hers. "If you had made it to Colorado Springs on your own and claimed that gold mine without my help?" Beatrice considered the question seriously, as she always did when he asked something important. "I think about it sometimes," she admitted, "and I always come to the same conclusion. I might have been wealthy, but I would not have been happy. Money cannot buy what we have, Gabriel. It cannot buy love or family or a life filled with meaning. I would have been alone, probably bitter, always looking over my shoulder for the next person who wanted to take what I had. That is no way to live. So you do not regret it, any of it?" "Not for a single moment," she said firmly. "The only thing I might have changed is meeting you sooner, having more years with you. But even our beginning, as terrifying as it was perfect in its own way. It showed us both what we were made of, what we were capable of. It forged us into the people we needed to be to build this life." Gabriel lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You are a remarkable woman, Beatrice Brennan. I have known that from the first moment I saw you, but I am reminded of it every single day." "And you are a remarkable man," she replied. "The best man I have ever known, and I am grateful every day that you chose to help a desperate woman hiding a gold claim under her skirt." They laughed together, the sound carrying across the yard to where their grandchildren played. It was a good life, a full life, a life neither of them would have predicted when they met in that cantina in San Elizario all those years ago. But it was their life, built on a foundation of love and trust, and the courage to choose each other over gold, security over wealth, happiness over fortune. As the sun set and the stars began to appear, Beatrice leaned her head on Gabriel's shoulder and closed her eyes, content in the knowledge that she had found everything she had ever needed. She had hidden a gold claim under her skirt, and a cowboy had told her to keep her gold because he only wanted her. And in choosing each other, they had found the greatest treasure of all, a love that had endured through every challenge, every hardship, every triumph. A love that would endure, she knew, until their very last breath and beyond, written in the hearts of the children and grandchildren they would leave behind, a legacy more valuable than any gold mine could ever produce. Their story became part of the family mythology, passed down through generations as an example of what real love looked like, of what it meant to choose people over possessions, relationships over riches. Their great-grandchildren would hear the tale and marvel at the courage of their great-grandmother, at the honor of their great-grandfather, at the love that had built the foundation upon which their entire family rested. But for Beatrice and Gabriel, living their final years in the home they had built together, surrounded by the family they had created and the land they had tended, the story was simply their life. Not a legend or a tale, but the day-to-day reality of two people who had found each other against all odds and had chosen to build something beautiful together. And as they sat together on their porch, watching the sun set over the Colorado mountains, they knew with absolute certainty that they had made the right choice all those years ago in San Elizario. The gold claim had been sold, its wealth invested wisely but not extravagantly. The men who had hunted Beatrice had faded into obscurity, their violence and greed leading them to predictable ends. But the love between a seamstress from Denver and a cowboy from Missouri had endured, had flourished, had created a legacy that would outlast any fortune. And that, they both agreed, was the only treasure that truly mattered.